Hello and welcome. The Fantastic Four has a very long publishing history. It was the series that began the so-called Marvel Age of Comics and launched that struggling company into comic book history. Even though Spider-Man was consistently the top seller for Marvel, the Fantastic Four maintained a certain unique prestige. It was, after all, the series that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby worked on for just over 100 monthly issues. This is a legacy and wealth of creativity worthy of respect. Naturally, over time, various writers have played with the concept, trying to freshen it up and take it in different directions. Although, most didn't stray too far from what worked. From time to time, an original team member would be temporarily swapped out for a new face, or the team would break up, go their separate ways, and then reunite later. But the core family dynamic and what the team represented usually remained the same. So with that in mind, let's look at a few radically different versions of the Fantastic Four. This is one of the kookiest takes on the team, and it was done by the co-creator, Jack Kirby. It's the foundation for the single issue, What If the Fantastic Four Were the Original Marvel Bullpen? Unsurprisingly, Stan Lee is the leader, Mr. Fantastic. Marvel Vice President, Saul Brodsky, is the Human Torch. Flo Steinberg, the only female in the early Marvel office, takes on the role of the Invisible Woman, and Kirby himself is the Lovable Thing. This was the first time Kirby had done anything Fantastic Four related since quitting Marvel almost a decade earlier. It was an idea that editor Roy Thomas had passed along to Kirby. Kirby wrote and drew the story, changing a few details, such as making Saul Brodsky the Human Torch instead of Thomas. Both Thomas and the assistant editor, Mark Gruenwald, did some rewriting, and the result was a brief, charming one-shot. The plot is pretty simple. This version of the Fantastic Four investigate who sent them a mysterious box that emitted cosmic rays and gave them all superpowers. The adventures they have are fictionalized and published as the Fantastic Four we all know and love. It's eventually discovered that Skrulls are meddling with Earth, and they are the source of the mysterious box that changed the Marvel Bullpen. Their devious plot is to change all of humanity, but it never gets to that point. As an idea, it's kind of amusing and adorable, but really, it's a basic action-packed Fantastic Four adventure, where all the characters have different faces and slightly different personalities. Not to mention, it's probably very sanitized to ensure everyone in the comic wouldn't feel offended by their portrayal. Well, specifically, Stan Lee. It's a fun curiosity. In the early 2000s, then Marvel publisher Bill Jemas allowed for a lot of experimentation with Marvel characters. Some results were rather unique, and some were completely misguided. Jemas himself was great as a facilitator, but he was not a creative visionary. Marvel stands as a testament to that statement, as does this version of the Fantastic Four. Jemas wanted the first family to lose their fortune, get real jobs, and move to the suburbs. Jemas fired Mark Waid from the mainline Fantastic Four title when Waid refused to take the team in such a ridiculous direction. Internet outrage followed. Waid was restored as the writer, and Jemas gave the idea to Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa. At the time, Aguirre-Sacasa was completely unknown. Nowadays, he's best known as the showrunner of such artistic gems as Riverdale, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, and Pretty Little Liars, Original Sin. His writing is some of the worst seen on TV in the last decade. There is no bad plot beat or ridiculous half-formed twist he isn't willing to incorporate. The weird thing about Aguirre-Sacasa is his comic book writing is solid. Afterlife with Archie and Sabrina were quite amazing. It's disappointing both were abandoned for a terrible career in TV. Quite honestly, this version of the Fantastic Four is, maybe, the best it could be considering it's a stupid idea. I mean, it's the Fantastic Four stuck in suburbia. No one wants to see that. Somehow, it limped along for 14 issues, but I suspect that was due to Jemas' support and his unwillingness to admit it's a concept no one was interested in reading. Walt Simonson only worked on the Fantastic Four for a brief period, but during his tenure, he introduced an all-new version of the team. These 3 issues were clearly an attempt to raise the Fantastic Four's profile. Not only does it include the visual treat of artwork by Art Adams, but it also features Marvel's most popular characters from that time. Anyway, in these 3 issues, a Skrull named Delilah incapacitates the Fantastic Four. She then assumes the role of Sue and assembles the replacement Fantastic Four. The 4 she selects are Wolverine, the Hulk, Spider-Man, and Ghost Rider. Delilah gets these 4 to team up and avenge the fake death of the Fantastic Four, and in the process, get rid of the Skrull team that followed her to Earth with the intent to capture her. A few issues of monster fighting action ensues before Delilah's plot is revealed and the real Fantastic Four return. It's pretty goofy in a very fun way. I'd like to say there was more to it, but there really isn't. It was a playful bait and switch that served its purpose, even though it's hard not to see it as a crass marketing ploy to boost sales. Which seems cynical, but it was 1990, and Marvel was definitely using tactics like that to make some extra cash. In this case, I'm okay with that, because then Simonson and Adams probably got a nice royalty check, which they both deserve. The reason for this entry is to explain why this miniseries by Grant Morrison and Jay Lee is not being examined. It all comes down to the apparent subtext. Famously, Morrison allegedly stated the Foundation being explored was an inappropriate attraction between the siblings Sue and Johnny. It wasn't something explicit, but all the interactions between the various antagonists apparently suggested this distasteful element. Now at that time, Morrison wasn't above saying something to the press to generate outrage or interest in something they were working on. You also see this tactic in Morrison's protege and former friend, Mark Miller. So it's possible this was a calculated attempt at being edgy and bringing more attention to the project. Over and above that element being pretty gross and not something I wanted to examine, I ultimately couldn't confirm this information. It's cited everywhere, but without a source. I even spent a number of hours looking for the source of that quote, going so far as to listen to podcasts, viewing video interviews, and looking through magazines. However, I came up empty. Which doesn't mean Morrison never said it, it means I couldn't verify it. Again, instinctively, it doesn't seem out of character for Morrison to say something like that. But is it real? I don't know. That said, considering the coverage this channel has given Morrison, I imagine most people would ask, hey, what about Fantastic Four 1, 2, 3, 4? It's pretty strange. Why isn't it in this video? Now you know my reasoning. I couldn't confirm the quote. Secondly, if it is real, which I suspect it is, then that's not a topic I'm overly interested in covering. But the artwork by Jay Lee is pretty stunning. I have to give it that. Unstable Molecules by James Sturm and Guy Davis is depressing. It's a serious, dramatic version of the characters, dealing with their hang-ups and interpersonal relationships. There's no costumes, there's no superheroics or supervillains. It's so completely divorced from the core concept that it almost feels like Marvel is trolling Fantastic Four fans. The best analogy I can think of is it's like a movie by an independent filmmaker like Jim Jarmusch, who's given these 4 characters and then asked to craft a story set in 1960 and taking place in a 24-hour period. What pivotal event would spin these characters in a different direction? That's Unstable Molecules. The conceit is these are real people with real careers and backstories that become the spiritual foundation for the comic book team. In fact, the back matter goes to great lengths to provide sources and notations to support this notion. But if you're a details-oriented killjoy like me, it takes 4 seconds with the search engine to confirm they're all fabricated. But the facade is very believable. This is a literate, metaphor-heavy piece. As an example, the very first page is the thesis, so to speak. Dr. Reed Richards is examining clusters of subatomic particles that are unstable and don't exhibit expected characteristics. Meaning, the 4 people examined in this comic will be unpredictable, contradicting their expected known behavior. They are the unstable molecules, acting erratically. Much like Grant Morrison, Sturm implies a deeply repressed attraction Johnny has for his mother figure, who also happens to be his sister, Sue. Like a lot of teenagers, Johnny treats his parental figure with contempt. Also, he's hormonal and a pretty big loser. And he uses panels of the comic Vapor Girl to, alleviate some of that teenage stress. Sue's mental state is mirrored in the adventures of Vapor Girl, thus making a connection between the 2 characters. On the surface, that connection supports Sue's feeling of being an unseen accessory to Reed. However, it also indicates that Johnny acts on his attraction to Sue through Vapor Girl. And that disgust and shame further manifests by treating Sue with complete disdain. It's kind of gross, but it is subtle, and there's no indication that Johnny will act on these feelings. Nor is there any suggestion that Sue reciprocates this attraction. She's oblivious to its existence. So it's just another piece of jumbled, confused emotions that Johnny experiences as a teenager. Still gross, but nowhere near as disturbing as the Morrison version, where they metaphorically, do the dirty through other characters acting as proxies. While there's nothing edgy about the material whatsoever, it is definitely the bleakest, darkest version of the team ever published. It's not a feel-good piece, not even a little. To be honest, the inspiration for this video came from the recent comic, What If Mickey and His Friends Became the Fantastic Four? When I looked through that sanitary and wholesome book, something inside me died a very quick, very painful death. It was just too much for my soul to take, so thanks for that, Marvel and Disney. Instead of writing a negative, completely reactionary review, I decided to examine some actual, interesting versions and scrub that experience from my memory. This is, by no means, a definitive look at unusual Fantastic Four takes. However, they're all examples of how to change up the formula and the varying results one gets. Some might wonder why Ultimate Fantastic Four isn't mentioned. That's because it wasn't all that weird or unusual. Sure, there were some interesting, trivial bits. It was the foundation of the universally maligned fan four-stick movie. It's also where the Marvel Zombies franchise began. And finally, Reed Richards became the villain, the Maker, who is the evil mastermind behind the current Ultimate Universe. But if memory serves, that development happened after the series was cancelled. Otherwise, it was basically the same dynamic, but with much younger characters. It's not as radical as the other entries. Usually at the end here, there's a little summary that gives the video a feeling of completeness. For this video, I've got nothing. So this is going to be a bit awkward. Roll credits, please. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and all that engagement stuff. If you have the means, please support this channel on Patreon. Thanks to all my current supporters on Patreon and YouTube. This has been a rough year, and your ongoing support and kindness have smoothed over a lot of rough edges. I sincerely cannot thank you enough. Extra special thanks to Eidolon, Constant Disappointment Records, Jeff Nicholson, Sicken, Francis De La Cruz, John Nyukes, Andrew Barton, Odin Ashcroft, Ruby St. Dennis, Phil Sagan, Edward Clayton Andrews, Corey Drew, Ellis Greger, Brian Deaton, Tom Granis, John Gaunt, James Graham, and Matt Marino. You were all justified and ancient.